Elizabeth Warren is concerned about disinformation campaigns on social media, and she should be. Most people should be. The same issues that we experienced back in 2016 are certainly occurring today. There's all sorts of misinformation, disinformation spread all throughout social media platforms. However, her potential solution or response to it could be worse than people realize, and I'll explain why. Now, Warren expressed fresh alarm that Silicon Valley's effort only nibble around the edges, failing to fully combat online threats that mislead voters or stoke conflict, including among Democrats competing for the White House in 2020. Now, here's the part that makes me worry a little bit. Warren said her presidency would push for civil and criminal penalties for those who seek to mislead people online about when, where, and how to vote. She also said she would seek sanctions against countries, including Russia, that attempt to undermine US elections with online propaganda. Now look, luckily, what I like is that she's being very specific, right? So if there is an obvious misinformation campaign to confuse people about when to vote or how to vote, then I think that there should be consequences, right? But you have to prove, just like with defamation suits, you have to prove malice. And as long as there's a sound legal process behind it, okay, maybe we're having a conversation. What I worry about though is when people start having discussions about civil or criminal penalties for misinformation on social media platforms, because let's keep it real. I mean, people think everything is misinformation if it's or disinformation if there's any critique in regard to their preferred candidate, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And so I hate slippery slope arguments, but we're already seeing some of the negative impacts of censorship on various social media platforms. Right now, a lot of content gets demonetized unfairly, I think. Yeah. And so what do you think is the right response to this, Ramesh?
Yeah, I have several thoughts on this. I mean, first of all, I think a lot of what people consider to be the truth from another perspective could be considered disinformation, which is like the intentional misleading of information.
Right.
So I think that the level of, as is often the case in my opinion, Senator Warren acknowledges and addresses sort of a problem, but then her solutions tend to be a bit sloganish in my opinion, and not really systemically address the issue itself, like break up big tech. Like what does that exactly mean? How would that function? So here's the issue. Senator Warren's resolution to this problem would be for the government and the states to be able to somehow monitor, address, and figure out what would be considered truthful or disinformation based. That is centralizing power over what is considered truthful or not is a big problem here. What should occur is a range of different kinds of actors in our society, journalists, people from different communities, different levels of granularity should be part of a team that kind of looks at different types of content that might go viral or circulate to a certain level. But she's certainly right to point out that the tech companies themselves are not going to do anything. I mean, they've promised better AI or farm it out to content moderators who are basically exploited laborers in the Philippines and in India and so on. So my point here is she's acknowledging the problem, but actually the solution is not simply to say that the state can monitor disinformation and resolve this, because the line between interpretive and disinformation is very gray, and the state, as we know fully well, as we saw with our senators and members of our House when they were addressing Mark Zuckerberg, for example, and Sheryl Sandberg, they don't really have that level of technical and computational and systemic knowledge to actually address and engage with these issues. So the way we deal with the problem is we create more jobs for people who could be auditing these systems, and this is a way in which the digital economy can support working people and middle-class people. And those people we have to pick very carefully, train them up, and they aren't going to be yes or no that's taken down, but they're going to voice their perspectives in such a way so that some decisions can be made. And I think the tech companies need to pay for this.
Oh, for sure. I absolutely agree with you on that. The one thing that does concern me though is, Facebook has already turned to what they refer to as journalists to do fact checking on some of the content that gets posted on their platform. And they've included the Daily Caller as fact checkers, which, if you know anything about the Daily Caller founded by Tucker Carlson, it is not a journalistic organization, and it is not any type of publication I would read or trust. And even, legacy media outlets like the New York Times. I mean, we've firsthand experienced the kinds of lies that some of their journalists are willing to publish about candidates they don't like. I mean,
tech companies should not be making a decision about our lives. They don't understand our lives. At the minimum, they are naive about our lives because when you're trained solely as an engineer, you don't understand social and political phenomenon. We're not taught in such a way. I mean, as a former engineer, I know this until I like unlearned my tendencies and took classes, as I was telling you, in other areas.
You are not a former engineer. You are always an engineer. Nobody can take that away from you. But like from my legal perspective and the way I see it, I think it's a great idea. It's just a matter of making sure that it is properly kind of outlined, because you could easily make this a statute, just like you have fraud. You know, you have to show that that person acted with intent. And if they were acting intentionally and there's evidence to show, to try to dissuade people so that they vote a certain way where it is specific information that's absolutely wrong and fraudulent, like have the US attorney have a go at it. Because I think something definitely needs to be done. And as long as the statute is written correctly, then you'll have a jury of people who can decide, were these people really trying to mess up our election? Because we need to find a way to address this propaganda and all these falsehoods, in part because unfortunately the American public, they're not able to decipher.
Right, and look, I think one of the most important things to do, and this is something that isn't taught in school right now, is media literacy. Like, people need to learn how to differentiate between real news and so-called fake news. People need to be able to understand how to dig into a story and figure out whether or not the claims in that story are accurate, right? And so right now, and part of the problem is societal, where we're so overwhelmed with information, but more importantly, so overwhelmed with like putting food on the table for our families, that we rely on headlines, right? So you'll read a headline without getting into what is this source, what's the body of this story, what are the details. I do like the idea of maybe treating this the same way you would treat defamation, right? And then you have like a high standard where you have to prove intent, you have to prove malice. But I do agree with Ramesh that it's not a good idea to get, to centralize it with the government. And I don't trust journalists in America.
I mean, I think your point, Adrienne, is really good. I mean, I think that there's different levels of the intervention that we need to take. I think definitely on the level of the state, we need to, kind of explore intentional defamation. Absolutely, in an analogous way when it comes to technology and social media. But I think on the level of society itself, we are increasingly seeing how big tech companies, especially Facebook, but also Twitter, monetize journalistic content in self-serving ways without giving journalists really any control or power at all. So what they need to do is pay for a new set of jobs for people in our society to be able to check and intervene within these flows of algorithmically manipulative disinformation. Because their entire model is making inflammatory and untruthful and hateful content visible because it gets our attention.
Yeah, that's
We've talked about this a lot, Anna.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's real smart.
Don't miss your chance to win a trip to Los Angeles and have dinner with Cenk, John, and me. Just head to tyt.com/dinnerinla to register to win. Sign up for a free Aspiration spend and save account. Then you just register your eligibility and swipe your Aspiration card daily on purchases to gain entries. Not only are you entering to win a trip to Los Angeles and dinner with TYT hosts, you're also not depositing your hard-earned money into fossil fuel exploration or production. As a friendly reminder, even if you already have an Aspiration account, you must still register for eligibility into the sweepstakes.